Hi everybody and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk with Bren O'Brien and Tim Rowe from The Straight, brought to you by our sponsors, Darley and Inglis. Today, how much is the most anticipated colt to sell in Australia going to sell for? China Horse Club's global plans. We have a chat with Daniel Allam about breeding and racing horses with his father. In racing, what is the future for racing on King Island? And who are the heroes of the 2024-2025 Group 1 season? While in wagering, what is the impact of the unregulated overseas operators on the Australian market? Tim, great to have you here as always. How much will the straight bloodstock have to part with when the colt by Snitzels out of Winx sells at Easter next year, do you think?
Well, I don't. John Stewart's come on Twitter and said it could be worth 15 to 20 million, which, look, if someone like John bids that high, of course he could, but I think that's ridiculous. That'd be 3 to 4 times the most expensive colt ever sold in Australia, which was the Jimmy colt, the half-brother to Black Caviar, wasn't he? And look, as history shows now, that buyer was a fraud and, jailed for fraud. So, was that a genuine, well, obviously it was at the time, but there probably wasn't a lot of sense to that buying. So, as opposed to the Piero filly last year that sold for 10, well, there's residual value. If this colt doesn't shape up, what's he worth? Look, all the colt syndicates will look at him to a level, but you put him as part of a portfolio. I think it'd be madness to include him as one horse. I'm guessing you'll make, 5 million, 5 to 10 maybe, but depending who's on him and collector's item, but it'll be great theatre. That's one thing for sure, and great publicity. He's already been on mainstream TVs. And the marketing team at Inglis, their KPIs would be going quite well at the moment, I would have thought.
Yeah, whatever the retainer they've got John Stewart on, they need to up it because he's been pumping up the possible purchase already. Even some discussion of the fact that, John Stewart mentioned, he could retire unraced and he'd be worth $10 to $15 million. Now that, for me, is just, to be honest, absolute rubbish, because there's a 3/4 brother to this horse who's a half brother to Winx called Boulder City, who is unraced, who currently stands in Victoria at $5,500. Now, he's had, I think, 6 seasons or something. He hasn't set the world on fire, whatever else. The economics don't make sense, do they, Tim? You have to be able to get a stallion into the track, really, to prove that I've got elite ability, regardless of its pedigree. It'd be highly surprising if anyone was able to pull off even to stand at a middle commercial fee. Nobody's going to pay those fees for a horse that's unraced and unproven.
Well, Boulder City, case in point, he's covered, I think, 157 mares at, the last draw at 4,400, but 5,000. I worked out $837,000 revenue. So if everyone's paid full price, but the Osmonds and who run, a great farm down there at Benalla, that's their commercial model, is breed to race stallions. They wouldn't have paid a lot for Boulder City. They certainly wouldn't be paying $5,000 full price. And their model includes vet fees. So, you probably have to include $1,000 plus in every service fee that's paid. So, do you pay an extra $5 million to, you might make $1 million in return unraced as a stallion, unless they hit the jackpot, which is, 1 in 100 at least, probably worse odds than that. So I can't. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to go buy this horse and he's worth X if he's unraced. You're hoping it's a very good horse, more like El Divino, was a Snitzel brother to Boulder City, I think, and had talent, won a kindergarten. Unfortunately died before he got to go to stud. But something like that, you could get your money back. But you need some race performance, and at this stage, I think 15 to 10 million plus is ludicrous. But time will tell.
Yeah, although there's a bit of cynicism around the progeny of champion mares and their performance or whatever. I think there's a bit of bias around that. But people just perceive that the Kylie Deeber's horses never really set the world on fire. Some lines horses weren't much chop either, but Black Caviar as a broodmare was okay without being spectacular. But that's just the numbers, the way you play. I don't think you can apply that across the board. It was quite interesting, actually. There's an article going up on the Straight this week about Kingsham, the champion Hungarian mare from the 1800s. And I was doing a bit of research into her, and the sort of general feeling was that she didn't really fire much as a broodmare, produced a couple of decent horses. That was about it. Go back down the line. I think she's the 19th dam to Camelot, who has won, an Irish Derby, an English Derby. So I guess I'm not saying you wait 150 years like those people have, but the value of having, those bloodlines is enormous, no doubt about that. but you have to have that commercial aspect about it to make it work. And that's probably the key part of it. And, there's probably a sense that this guy's a bit more like Snitzel, and there's a bit more of a familiar sense about him in terms of what the commercial market's seen and what they're comfortable with. I think the big guys are all have a crack at him. The challenge with being a colt is whether that's going to apply for the Japanese have got to get involved, or whether the Northern Hemisphere people, because how that's going to work. But look, it'll be a fascinating battle, like the one was last year. It'll be a fascinating story as it plays out. John Stewart's working hard to amp up the coverage of it and work that out. And good on him. But it's an interesting one. I want to sort of pivot now into a sort of another global player, which you had a good chat with Eden Harrington from China Horse Club this week, Tim, in an article that's appearing on the Straight today, just been published. Their model's quite fascinating. Obviously, in Australia, we know them primarily through their association with Newgate. Also selling their own horses and having horses based out of the Chase in New South Wales, selling them out. But obviously, those China Horse Club colours have that global significance. They're an interesting player because they've had so many involvements and so many champion horses over the last 10, 15 years, including the likes of Justify, State of Rest, those types of horses, but probably don't have the global profile of a Yulong or some of these other sort of players that have emerged in the last sort of decade.
Well, I think that's, speaking to Eden, who's ex-journo from Telegraph, early to mid-2000s, they're in partnerships. Their model is to be in partnerships with other people, share the risk a little bit and the enjoyment with other people. And so I guess they've left it to other people in Australia, or Newgate's case, Henry Fields, generally the spokesperson, rather than, say, Michael Smith from China Horse Club occasionally. But in terms to get those in-depth interviews, Mr. Teo, you and I have spoken to him and seen him at sales, but not really, he's not the figurehead in Australia. And it's the case in the States with Windstar Farm and some of their partnerships in Europe with, I think they've been in with Sheikh Farhad at Qatar Racing and Howden, Howden's Insurance, well known that, I think it's David. Yeah, different. So, I guess it's deliberate. They don't need to chase the publicity, but they've had a lot of success and they've ridden the ups and downs. Yes, they've got money, but Eden said China Horse Club has to at least break even and make money. It is a business after all, and they've stayed in it for sort of 12 years and had, the Justifies and Life is Good and a few other stallions over there, and obviously the Newgate ones over here have helped pay the bills, and they seem to be as enthusiastic about it as ever. One of their, many varied business interests.
Yeah, and I think these players are a key part of the Australian market. They find a lot of attraction in Australia. There's a reason why these markets are, why these people are attracted into Australia, because of the opportunities commercially that they can get the returns through selling horses, but also racing for strong prize money as well. So it is a strength of the diversity of these players at this sort of level. It's certainly a strength in the Australian market, isn't it, Tim?
Yeah, that's why, of China Horse Club's 100 brood mares, they've roughly got more than half, or 55 or so, are in Australia, is because they can commercially get a return. Again, early days they were solely in France. I guess prize money was a bit better in France and returns, and then they've branched out to Ireland and UK as well. But commercially, Australia and the US makes the most sense. They do have some horses in China. Commercially, I'm not sure how that works exactly, but they, as the name suggests, they do have some horses there, race horses. Don't think they've got many breeding stock at the moment. That they're looking at the Middle East. That's obviously a growing market. That runner in Bahrain. Yeah, they're looking everywhere, and the industry needs players like China Horse Club, maybe not getting the huge headlines like Wathnan and Ammo Racing and Yulong, but they're huge contributors to the industry.
And joining us here on Straight Talk is Daniel Allam from Allam Bloodstock. Daniel, you and your dad, Steve, have had a long association with racing. What are your earliest memories of sharing the passion for racing with your dad, and sort of how that came about?
Oh, mate, as long as I can remember, my old man has always had a horse in work growing up. He was born and bred in Pilliga. My godfather was East Bedernester, and he used to have a lot of horses in the country, and we used to race horses. But my youngest memory, I can't quite remember it, but I see a lot of photos that he's got all his racehorse winning photos, in his house. And there's a photo where he had a horse race called Orlais Star. She was a pretty handy horse. She won 5 or 6 in the bush in a row, and then Peter trained her and they brought her to Sydney, and she won a few metro races. But my old man backed her and she won on a Saturday, and I was about 5 or 6 years old, and he was holding me and I was just bawling eyes out in the photo. And I like go, Dad, why was I so upset? He's like, because I put 50 cents each way on the horse for you to give you a ticket. And when the horse won, all he wanted to do was go and collect your 50 cents each way. You didn't want to be there for the photo. It was a great day for me, but you wrecked it because you were just crying the whole time. And I got that photo put in there so I could explain it to you one day. So that was one. And another time, I would say, I'm probably she's never telling you this, but he was having a bet at Canterbury night meeting when I was about 10 or 12 years old, and I had $5 on a horse that was the favourite, and he's had about $3,000 on a horse called Go to Grey that was 11-1, and it missed the kick Go to Grey that night by about 3 lengths and lobbed in a photo with my favourite that I had $5 on, and I was standing next to him and I'm going, Go to Grey, go to Grey. Go to Grey won. Oh, sorry, Go to Grey lost. My horse on the $5 won in the photo, and I was jumping up and down, and he said, I've never hit you. He said, but that day I just felt like carving you up on that. So there are 2 good memories I have of racing horses.
Well, it's funny. I mean, obviously that banter or that sort of sense around that stuff is a key part of the relationship between you and your dad and sort of making it work, because a lot of people couldn't work in a business or in a place like horse racing where there's so many ups and downs with their dad, because it'll be an emotional journey. But clearly you two share a great bond around that stuff.
Yeah, mate. I'm an only child. Like, mum and dad, they deserve to have probably 50 kids, but they had me as an IVF baby, and they tried 13 times and ended up with me. And we just formed a really close bond. We do everything together. I'd say we're more best friends than we are father and son, and we work together. We complement each other. Like, I'd say that, we make decisions together, and my mum loves it. She's involved as well. And between all of us, touch wood, we really, family first always. And that's been a good guiding principle for us moving forward. Because if you stick together and try not to argue, you have your tiffs and bickering arguments all the time, don't get me wrong, but if that's your common goal is to foster each other and look after each other, well, you generally get there in the end. That's the way that I see it. So, and yeah, you're right. There's a lot of heartbreak in horse racing, and especially horse breeding, and you need to have thick skin. And if you got someone with you, that you love dearly, it makes it very.
And Daniel, it's obviously evolved from those early days in the bush with Peter Nestor to developing a broodmare band, and I believe either all or most of them at Sedge and Ho these days, but it's really quite developed with, you've got some very nice mares in your ownership.
Yeah, no, it has. So that's an interesting story in itself. So my father had a lifelong friend called Bill Bennett. He was a very successful businessman. He was based in Penrith. And those horses that I referred to in racing when I was growing up were always horses that he and Bill raced together. And it sort of as a bit of a tribute to Bill, I used to call him my adopted grandfather, because I don't quite remember my dad's dad. He passed away when I was really young, and my mum's father lived out at Tree near Dubbo. So Bill was from Penrith. He was older, and I always used to call him my grandfather, and we named our property at London after him, Bennett Lodge. But he was a pretty wealthy man in his own right. But he grew up through the Depression, and he had his quirks, and he used to try and do things on the cheap occasionally, or all the time, I should say. And I can't remember the year, but I reckon it'd be like 20. In the early 2000s, he and Dad just decided to have a real good go at it. They'd always wanted to buy an expensive filly and race her. At the time, I think John and Michael and Wayne were training a horse of ours called Lion Command around that time, and we had a bit of success with him, and he was a homebred, and he took us on a good journey. And they decided to go and buy a couple of fillies. So we bought a filly called Lorna May, who was a mare that we bred from and sold recently, and she ran about 9 seconds. She was black type. John and Dad picked her out, and she did a great job for us. And also the following year or the year after, bought a horse called Lady Sharapova, which John and Michael and Wayne trained as well. And then obviously they were well bred, they were well related. We ultimately decided to breed from them, and Dad was always breeding horses, like it was always something he did as a bit of a hobby, but then, it's a passion of his, it's a lifelong passion. I'd say it's more his passion than my passion, although mine is growing daily, and it's definitely, something I've really enjoyed over the last few years. And we decided, it's hard to have, like the first, I remember with Lady Sharapova, we sent her to Snitzel, that was big for us. We were so excited. Her first foal came out with a leap like, I wish I win, and it was just all for nothing, respectfully, that just, we tried our hardest. And then we sort of realized that if you're going to do it, you probably need to have more than 2 mares. And if you're going to try to treat it like a business, you probably have to spend a bit more time in it. So we teamed up with Andy Williams, and we went on a great journey with Andy. He bought us some good horses, and it's bittersweet because every time I think of Andy, I think of him talking Dad and I into buying Bonnie Mac, and she was just such an amazing mare. And I didn't want to buy her. She was 12 or 13, and we were trying to buy young, and Dad sort of made a captain's call. And unfortunately, she passed away, after Exceedance, won the big Group 1. It was hard to get over that. That took a lot of getting over. Like, we had her insured, but, you would have been much better to have her, breeding in our stable. And that was a tough one. And then, so we decided to just start buying a few more brood mares. And over time, we've sort of learnt, what we think the market wants. And recently we've been guided by Bruce. And I don't think I know anyone in the industry who has a bad word about him. And he's been he's been so important to us, and he's really reinvigorated my passion into it. And we've been on a journey the last 4, 5, 6 years together, and it's really turned into a business. And we're buying breeding rights and in stallions and shares in stallions, and trying to make them correctly. And it's been great, and had a great time with Yarraman as well previously. And you're right, the mares are now all at Sedgenho, and it's, anyone you speak to who's been at Sedgenho, it's such a beautiful property. Like, I just feel like the mares do so well there because they're so relaxed, and they're so well looked after, like all the other stud farms in the area. And it's been really good now. Probably speaking too much, but now we're having a great time, and I hope Bren and Tim continues that way.
And go on, Tim.
Sort of how commercial is that, Dan? Your approach to commercial, having to make it pay, I guess, or we saw you at, I think it was Melbourne Premier, and you were selling horses down there. Just better place down there with the stock you had on the ground, this year.
Yeah, I think we made a lot of mistakes when we started. Like, we had this idea of trying to protect the mare, and horses that probably weren't going to cut it. Like, yearlings we tried to hold on to, and lo and behold, most of them couldn't gallop. And we soon realised that, if you take a horse to a sale and all these good judges look at it and they're not keen on buying it, there's a reason why. And that was a key moment for us in terms of what we were doing. And we sort of changed our approach, and now we really only want to stay in the ones we think can really gallop. And the other horses, you need to move on. And I've learned a lesson in myself. Like, if you, and I'll just say it, if you've got a horse or a yearling by one of the top stallions and you're going to take it to a Magic Million and you're going to be in the 20th to 30th best, you sort of, it makes it a bit difficult, you know what I mean? You sort of fall between the cracks, and that's happened to us before. So this year we, with the guidance of Peter and Brian, Sedgenho and Bruce, we decided to send a couple of horses to the Premier sale, and it worked out well. They stood out there a lot better than they would have against some of the sharper 2-year-olds at Magics, or the real quality that they get at Inglis at Easter. And it's definitely a business decision. It's commercial. You don't always get it right, but I think with anything, like even if our business, if you surround yourself with the right people, and you take advice from them and you believe in what they tell you, generally you don't always make the right decision, but it's a good framework for trying to make the right decision.
Yeah, well, obviously your racing interests are strong as well too, Daniel. I mean, you're the man responsible for naming Democracy Manifest. Is that correct?
100%. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to come up with a good name for a horse and a cult name for a horse, but it's another thing for it to be a good horse, which is handy, because it's all good as name a horse a great name, but if it's run around for nothing in the middle of nowhere, nobody cares. But it must be satisfying to come up with a good name and then come up with a good horse as well.
It's it ebbs and flows. I've had another couple of good names for horses that I thought would get a similar reaction, and I named a horse Student of War recently after the Mike Tyson clip where he talks about himself being a student of war, and we never raced it, and we sold it online through Inglis Digital the other day. So I feel like that's one I let go. It's one that got away from me. But look, that was a good story in itself. Quickly, like everyone's probably heard it, but we went to the Ready to Run sale. You know, we've got the spelling and adjustment property out there that that Peter Nestor was originally at, and Lionel Cohen now is doing a great job running. And we bought 3 horses. We bought one for Annabelle Neesham because, you know, Annabelle Archibald, she was really supporting us, and you know, we got on really well with her. We bought one for Greg Hickman. He was sending us a lot of horses, and while we're sitting there, I'd probably had about 15 Forex Golds, and so we should buy one for Cody, your cousin Cody. And Lionel, to his credit, said, I've been looking at one, a Flying Artie. I think it's nice. And we said, if it's cheap, we'll buy it, you know, like compared to what we paid for the other 2. And went through the ring for 70 grand. We bought it, rang a few friends, got a couple of friends in it. A couple of the guys took 2.5%. They never owned a horse before. It's just the end of story. And then what happens is the horse we buy for Annabelle's called Ticket to Anywhere. We paid $150,000 for that. We sold it online for $6 grand. The horse that we bought with Greg Hickman was called Vancouver Khan. It didn't realise it didn't do too well. And the cheapest one we bought turned out to be Democracy Manifest. And it's the one with the name that everybody seems to want to talk about. But and that was good in itself. Cody was training him. And long story short, we took him to a showcase race at Port Macquarie, a huge run for second, 15 wide, round the turn, and just got beat by one of Brett Kavanagh's horses and leader bias track. And Graham Buckley got off him and said, this could be one of the best horses I've ridden in the country. Then Cody stopped training, and, you know, we thought, well, we've got to give him every chance. Why don't we find a trainer in Sydney and get on board with Charlie Duckworth, rang Charlie, Chris, and they decided to take him, and it's been a fantastic journey. Like it's been something, you know, that really, really enjoyed. And hopefully we'll give him a couple of weeks off now after his last run, and we'll bring him back for the spring, and let's hope they go real quick in front and he gets to run over the top of them one more time.
And you've got a horse in on Saturday in the Glass House called the 300 that you bred by Invincible, and, you know, in trilogy colours now with Dane Adrian, and, you know, still, from what I can see, still got a share in him, and, yeah, in a stakes race on Saturday.
Yeah, most of the people who have dinner with me, you know, that I like to tell a few funny stories, and I'll tell you how we met the trilogy people. It's fantastic. It's a good reflection of sometimes how my father thinks. But Bruce and Henry and the Newgate team invited us, and I think we were talking over there on the Kentucky trip a few years back, where we were going to Kentucky. And look, we sort of keep to ourselves, you know. We at the time we had a few people that we knew at Grayson, but I hands down believe going on that trip with Newgate was the best thing that my father and I ever did. Bruce sort of pushed us into doing it. You know, it's always hard to find the time to do things like that. And I've got a young family, but he said, no, you've got to come. You know, you've got some stallions with us, and we want you to come, and I have to thank you for that. So we organised to go. I booked a couple of flights. I'm sitting at my office here at Norwest, and my father, he sweats the small stuff. It's never the big stuff we argue about. It's always the small things. And the first 2 nights of the trip, we booked into the Beverly Hills Hotel. They'd booked us into the Beverly Hills Hotel. And I'm sitting down, and I've got access to his email, and I've got my email on the screen, and I see about 2 weeks before the trip a bill coming from the Beverly Hills Hotel, and it's about $5,800 for 2 nights. And I knew he was going to blow up over it. Like, I just knew it was coming. So I can see when he reads his emails. So I see the email get read, and my phone starts ringing straight away. And I say, "Hi, Dad." And he goes, $5,800 for 2 nights. Why did you only sleep there? $5,800 for 2 nights. And I said, Dad, listen, it's a trip of a lifetime. It's only a couple of nights there. You know, the dollar's not great. Like, you know, it's a once in a lifetime trip. I said, please don't sweat the small stuff. And I probably can't swear on here, but he said, it's the effing small stuff that's got you in that BMW that you drive today. Right? And it hung up the phone. And then about 3 minutes later, because our email goes through some cloud, I get a bill for $5,800 as well. So I ring you back, and I said, it's pretty cheap, $5,800. He's like, what do you mean? And I was like, cool, it's now $10,600. And you go, yeah. So I rang the Beverly Hills. I said, look, we're just happy to share the savings for 2 nights. I knew it would keep him happy. And they're like, oh, no, it's a group booking quote, mate. We charge per head, and whether you put 10 in the same room, we're going to charge you the same price. So, but look, that trip, we met so many great people. Like, you know what I mean? We met the Stannings, we met the Altamontes. I won't go through them all. It's not fair to do that. But you know, and then going back to Trilogy and Jason, we met the Dingwalls. We met just so many good people, hosted by Tom and his wife at their beautiful property in Kentucky. Like, it was, and we got to really, you know, the Grants and the Cunninghams. Like, there were just so many good people on that trip, and we spent 2 weeks together, and I learned a lot looking at, you know, a lot of the stock over there and visiting all the best stud farms, and we built a real bond with a lot of people who also went on the trip. And I think that has really changed the way that we attend sales and what we do now, because we've just so many people we know and we like. And even my father says to me, and we watch Flightline win the Breeders' Cup, you know, and that was just once in a lifetime thing to do. And you know, when we reflect on it, we say, look, it wasn't cheap, but it was one of the best things we did. And based on that relationship, getting back to your question, Tim, you know, Jason and Sean and the team, Kath, they looked at that horse, they liked the horse, and goes back to what we're saying. We want to keep shares in the ones we think we can gallop. And she was such a good mare to us, and she still is, sassy and smart. So they bought him at the sales. We have a running joke about the 300. It's something that Jason and I always joke about. And again, it's not appropriate to this podcast after the Spartans, you say. And so anyway, we named him, and we sent him to Gay and Adrian, get on, you know, with Bruce's connection with Adrian and Gay. It's just such a positive relationship there as well. And he hasn't drawn inside barrier 8 for his last 5 starts, and we think he's got a ton of ability, but like last start, he just missed the kick, half a length, and, you know, in a field like that, it's just, you know, and, you know, it really makes it difficult for himself. But, you know, we're looking forward to the time when the stars align. And, you know, Ange Jones, you know, I don't know Angela. I don't think she's ridden for us before, but I see her winning a lot of races. And she might have actually. We had a horse with Tony Gollock, so I take that back to Haitian Dancer. But yeah, I'm looking forward. I'm excited about her getting in the saddle. And, you know, if he can just, you know, jump well and put himself in the right spot again from a wide barrier, it's exciting, Tim. I hope he can do well. It'll be great for our mare too.
Sharing those passions and sharing those things and sharing those moments overseas and all that sort of stuff, it's a key part of racing. And the thing that people enjoy is that, you know, it's a business, but there's that enormous social aspect of it. Sort of flowing on from that, it's obviously you guys' close association with Penrith Panthers as well. And I know Bruce Slade's a fan as well. And you obviously have a strong connection with that club as well. I mean, how does the thrill of being sort of, close by in that rugby league world, especially during the highly successful era for the Panthers, compare with watching your horses run about?
Oh, mate, it's tough for me as a Bulldog supporter. I've been a lifelong Bulldog supporter my whole life, and I've just had to wear the Panthers cap. But it's been so good for that. And my late uncle Barney Allam, who passed away probably August last year, he was a very special man, and he was a general manager here at Allam, and I was a lawyer before I started working here for the company buying land, and he asked me to come over and work with the family, and Dad's retired, obviously. His passion's horses. Barney's passion was property development. Sometimes I wish it was the other way around, but yeah, he's born and bred in Penrith, you know, or they were born and bred to it. But we spent a lot of our life in Penrith. Our office was in Penrith. You know, Barney was a real big community man, and so was Dad. And an opportunity came up to sponsor the Panthers, and we took it with both hands. And there's not many private companies that are on the back of NRL jerseys, and it was just a good fit. When we started the sponsorship like 7 or 8 years ago, the Panthers weren't doing too well, and it just, you know, the stars aligned, and 4 premierships in a row, and the thrill of that, and, you know, going to all the games and being able to take people in the industry to the games, and also, you know, agents that we deal with and vendors that we buy land off. It's been such a positive for us. I will say this, the only thing that annoys me is 7 or 8 years ago, we could have gone to every game every week because no one wanted to go. But for the last 4 years, they'd book out every table in the first week of the draw coming out. You could have waited for people to pull out. Like, it's been tough. So this year, we're now at the bottom of the ladder. I've been making a few jokes, actually, because I think our last year of sponsorship is next year. And they want to sit down this year and renegotiate the deal. And when Panthers were coming last, I was licking my lips. I was like, I couldn't have worked out better. But they seem to have got their spark back. And by the time they sit down with it, so probably cost us more than it would before. But no, it's been great with Penrith people through and through. I live in, you know, Penrith. Dad lives at Ludlam down the road on the farm at Mount Lodge, and it's that is so good for our community. There's a lot going on out here. You know, we're on the doorstep of the new airport. it's such a, some people think of Penrith as a bit of a stigma, but it's such an amazing place, and we love it here, and it's just been great for the community, great for all the young kids who aspire to be rugby league players, and it's been a great journey the last 4 years. And would it be as good as one of your own horses winning a big race? Oh, say equivalent. I don't want to offend anybody. They're both as good as each other. Let's say that.
Daniel, thank you so much for your time, mate. Great to talk to you, and all the best with all the horses coming up.
No, really appreciate it, and thanks for the call, and I really appreciate too reading your articles, guys, as they come through to my email. They're just the break I need during the day when I'm just sick of what I'm doing. You guys pop through with your 4 or 5 points, and it just gives me that 10 or 15 minutes away. And I think you're doing a great job, and I really appreciate it. Look forward to the next one if you want me back on.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it. Excellent.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Dan.
The following segment is brought to you by Darley, who's won 3 of Europe's biggest stallion-making races, Native Trail. He mixed it in all the right circles. He won the National Stakes just like Debawi and Daniel Dancer. He took out the Dewhurst just like Too Darn Hot and Petitubo, and claimed the Irish 2000 Guineas like Kingman and Debawi. An unbeaten champion at 2, a classic winning 3-year-old, and a superb specimen from the same sire line as I'm Invincible. Native Trail returns to Darley, New South Wales this season. Racing class becomes breeding class, and at just $27,500 including GST, he's an opportunity not to be missed. To racing news now, Tim, and news this week about King Island's future. Tas Racing keen to continue and have committed to fixtures for this year. It's a story we've followed a bit across the straight, across the journey. The challenges with the island is not necessarily the funding per se. It's more about the number of horses they can get there and the number of people that can work with those horses. Tim, it's interesting to pick you up. Like, King Island's probably a little bit of a microcosm of broader regional Australia and some of its challenges, and it's probably exacerbated by its isolation, I suppose. But in your mind, how important is it that we continue to support these, regional remote race courses, Birdsville, places outback Queensland, all these places that have these things? How is it important for the racing sort of, I guess, foothold within Australia that we continue to support these, these remote venues?
It's vital, and it's, you mentioned Birdsville. From a racing Queensland perspective, my understanding is they don't, certainly when running tab meetings, they lose money on that. But from a tourism perspective for those communities and country racing and those trainers, it's vital that those trainers that do support those meetings, I guess, that are so isolated, as you mentioned, with King Islands, they've got water, it's an island. So that makes it a little bit more of a challenge as opposed to, say, Birdsville or Broome. I saw something on racing.com yesterday about Broome, where trainers can drive up there and then leave whenever they want, where if you committed to King Island, you probably have to stay for the season, which is 2 or 3 months commitment, and train the horses. And so you really need someone to take a holiday, like a Bill Hayes has been in the last couple of years with Tubber Williams, as some people would know Tubber, a industry identity, I guess, through breeding, and he's done bits of everything and ridden at the picnics, and so you need those guys. And for King Island to survive this year, they're going to need some of those trainers to head down and bring 5 or 6 horses to make it work. I think in that story that Warwick Barr wrote, they need probably 35 horses to really make the fields stack up.
Yeah, and I think what's kind of was an interesting little point in that article with Tas Racing raised the fact that they might use it as a bit of a training opportunity for young people coming into the sport to go and work in King Island and have a sort of bit of a holiday as well as a sort of an experience. And I think it speaks to the importance of these places as nurseries of future professionals within the industry. A lot of these people have natural exposure to horses in their day-to-day life, and they go to these places. Like, you look at the great jockeys that have come out of Australia through very remote places. I think it's important. I think it's difficult for racing because I think from a wagering perspective, a lot of these things generally don't pay their way. But it's almost like you have to have a different model and a development model based upon those places as compared to your day-to-day racing. Anyway, interesting around that. Very much at the other end of the scale. I penned an article this week about the dominant Group 1 trainers, jockeys, etc. of the past season, and it's sort of interesting to have a look through. We, much been made of Chris Waller breaking the record for the most amount of Group 1s for any trainer for a season in Australia, 19. 7 of Waller's victories came by 1 horse via Sistina, as we know. James McDonald, dominant from a jockey's point of view. He went within 1 of breaking Malcolm Johnson's seasonal record of 16. He got to 15. I'll obviously have 2 more Group 1s, so we've got 76 Group 1s now in Australia, but there's plenty of opportunity for those horses to do that. It's just interesting to look at sort of the spread, I suppose. If Waller, I said, won 19 Group 1s, but there were 30 individual trainers with Group 1 wins in Australia this season. That's 3 more than the total from last season. And if you look at McDonald on 15, as I said, but there were, I think, 33 jockeys, including Tom Sherry, who won, obviously, Group 1 a couple of weeks ago. There is much as we talk about the dominance of the big players in Australia, there's still enough diversity there. It kind of feels like, certainly at that top level, that there's enough diversity of stories. I mean, the Melbourne Cup being a case in point, quite a remarkable case in point of last year. But, Tim, it still feels like there's enough out there in terms of diversity to sort of push these things through at the top level.
Yes, it's getting a good horse, no matter who trains it, is hard. And you mentioned Chris Waller. Well, Via Sestina was a huge contributor to those 19. So there's opportunities out there, and whether some races should be Group 1s or not is a completely separate debate. But you can. Annabelle Nation went to WA and won the the Railway, and then Kieran Maher won the Norther League. So you can spread it around. Placing your horses, I think, is much about placing your horses and going, okay, Sydney and Melbourne carnivals are fantastic in the autumn and spring, but do we bypass that and target Brisbane or Perth with light infantry man that was sort of peaked in Melbourne Cup week or on the up on a race during Melbourne Cup week and went to WA. So it's about placement, which is a skill in itself, as well as getting the horses fit. And I guess that's a demonstration of that with the trainers.
The following segment is brought to you by Inglis. New Zealand's champion 2-year-old of last season, the Cracker Millions and Sistema Stakes winner Velocious will be offered for sale via the English Digital July online sale. Velocious will be available for inspection at Vinery Stud from Tuesday next week, while the English Digital July late sale will run from July 25 to July 30. Meanwhile, Inglis are currently taking entries for its July early online sale, which runs from July 11 until July 16. Finally, this week in wagering, story of Tim today, Tim, about unregulated operators in the Australian market, largely overseas-based companies. They're no small contribution, really. When you look at, it's about $1.6 billion a year, and that was in 2023, so they've probably grown since. That's about 15% of the Australian gambling market. Now, a lot of this stuff is sort of online pokies and online casinos and stuff like that, which are not approved for use in Australia, but are able to, but some of these people have been targeting the Australian market. ACMA's responsible for sort of, basically telling these people to go away. They don't have a lot of power internationally to do that, apart from warning letters, and they can block URLs. I guess my point around this one is how does this relate to racing? Well, what is interesting is that the Asian Racing Confederation did a study in 2022 to say 74% of the illegal sites or overseas sites that they monitored or they looked at had Australian racing as their product. So in the context of talking about decline in wagering, I don't think you can ignore the fact that overseas betting, and it's not just the exchanges that we talk about in Asia and all that sort of stuff. Overseas betting or betting on overseas sites on Australian racing is a thing, and it's something that is a threat to the overall, I guess, financial stability or financial future of Australian racing.
Yeah, I guess you got to ask. There's 100 corporate bookmakers, at least in Australia. Why a punter sees the need to go overseas? Yes, there's crypto and all those, but as the market gets tougher or less value, as we know why percentages are higher because of the taxes and different things. As I'm not blaming the bookmakers, the Australian licensed bookmakers for this. It's just a fact. If you get better value elsewhere, including the illegal exchanges and stake.com or wherever all these other different sites, you go, oh, well, I'm getting better bang for my buck. New Zealand will go through this with their, as we spoke about last week, with the Entain deal and
the
making it legal for international bookies to take bets from Kiwis. Most will be unaffected, but the percentage of why you feel the need to go to the extra mile to bet overseas or bet with an illegal is it value? Is it because you can get on? Whereas, Australia, as I said, of those 100 bookies, sometimes if you happen to take the right price early when you've just opened up an account, you have to give over a kidney or, 6 months of bank statements. I've been through that, it's not fun, and that's just because you've not even back to winner, just taking the right price and goes, I'm just going to ship my money elsewhere. And that comes down to the regulators and I guess in being, if you over-regulate, you're incentivized to look elsewhere off into the black market, I guess. And I sense we'll see more and more of that at the moment because of the arguable over-regulation, or the way it's regulated. Maybe not over-regulation, but how it's regulated in Australia.
Yeah, and I think it isn't just a closed shop. I think that's the important thing. Probably come to more prominence because of the presence of Stake and Shuffle based their operations in Australia. Neither of those take Australian customers. They're not allowed to under the IGA, but that doesn't stop a lot of their rivals or a lot of their other these things based in Caribbean islands to sort of offer these services. And as I said, $1.6 billion, that was a couple of years ago, and the estimations over sort of 5 years between tax implications around point of consumption, also product fees, will cost racing and sports around $2.6 billion over 5 years. Not an insignificant amount of money when we talk about all the other challenges that racing faces at the moment. Anyway, I just wanted to sort of bring that up as something that needs to be considered in the overall balance of things. And actually, we go back to the you win, you lose more, you win some, you lose more report from a couple of years ago. A lot of kerfuffle's been around about the advertising ban in that, but this aspect of it, regulation and the international stuff, featured in about 4 of the 31 recommendations, Tim. So it's something that's been identified before, something that does involve some issues around how do you actually practically enforce those bans, and that's something New Zealand will have to work around, but it's something definitely worth considering. All right, thanks for joining for the Straight Talk, brought to you by our sponsors, Inglis and Darley. Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you're listening to us, be it on YouTube, all the places you can get down, Apple, Spotify, Podbean, all these places. Be sure to send us an email at editor@thestraight.com.au. Let us know what you want us to talk about, anyone you think we should be speaking to, all that type of stuff. And we'll talk to you again next week.